All right, I think we've had plenty of time for people to start joining, so we can get started with the quick introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this edition of IFP Group Webinars, which is hosted by the Ras Al Khaimah municipality, and the topic for which is energy efficiency and renewables in the built environment, which is in line, of course, with the RAK Energy Summit. Firstly, I would like to thank our great panelists for joining us today, and I'll give them all an opportunity to introduce themselves in just a few moments. But first, a few quick house rules, if you will, to go over our interaction for this afternoon and to give you the opportunity to see what the Zoom platform can offer. Firstly, my name is Mahir Ibrahimi. I'm the Conference Director for the RAK Energy Summit, and I'll be your host this afternoon. If at any point during the webinar you have any questions for myself and the team regarding the Zoom platform, regarding our future webinars, regarding the main event, or anything else, you can contact us using the Q&A function, which should be in the bottom center of your screen if you're on a computer, or on one of the buttons on your phone if you're on the phone. And you can message us directly and privately, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Now, please do bear in mind that all attendee microphones and webcams are disabled during the webinar, so you will only hear and see our panel. Accordingly, again, as I said, if you have any questions for us, you can get in touch using the chat function. But of course, if you would like to ask questions directly to the panelists, you can also do so using the Q&A function. Just please do specify which of the panelists, if a specific one or multiple panelists, or the entire panel you would like to ask the question to. And in the last 15 minutes of the hour-long webinar, I will go ahead and ask this directly to the panelists myself. Finally, just a quick note, if we could ask everybody to please do take the 1 minute it takes to fill out the post-webinar survey. This always goes a long way in helping us prepare for future webinars, and we do appreciate your feedback. Now, I've taken enough of your time, so without further ado, I'll pass things along to our phenomenal moderator today, Fariman Garcia, who is partner at Denton's and a member of the board for the CEBC. Fari, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to IFP, Ras Al Khaimah Energy Summit and Ras Al Khaimah Municipality for organising this webinar. I am Fariman Garcia. I'm Vice Chair of the Clean Energy Business Council, and that's a non-profit organisation which seeks to promote clean energy across the Middle East and North Africa, from utility-scale renewables to distributed energy to energy efficiency, clean energy finance, new energy vehicles, and we also have a subgroup for women in clean energy as well. I'm also a partner in the energy and infrastructure team of Denton's. That's an international law firm. In fact, it's the largest law firm in the world, and we've been in the Middle East for a long time. Indeed, we celebrated our 50th anniversary in the UAE, of being established in the UAE last year. So moving on to today's webinar, the UAE launched its Energy Strategy 2050 in 2017, and that was the first unified energy strategy in the UAE based on supply and demand. And it aims to deliver clean, secure, and affordable energy, as well as reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But in addition to the federal strategy, there are a number of strategies that have also been set at an emirate level. And in Ras Al Khaimah, the Energy Efficiency and Renewables Strategy 2040 has set indeed very ambitious targets for Ras Al Khaimah. And that includes 30% energy savings, 20% water savings, and 20% contribution from renewables by 2040, which is fantastic. And there's an ultimate target of 44% renewables by 2050. So a lot has been going on in Ras Al Khaimah, in the Emirate, and today we're going to be focusing on energy efficiency and renewables in the built environment. We have a strong panel of government representatives who are going to guide us through some of the developments that have been happening, but also give us some insights into the priorities going forward for Ras Al Khaimah. I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves in more detail. But let me just give a very, very brief introduction. So we have Andrea De Gregorio, who is Executive Director of the Energy Efficiency and Renewables Office at Ras Al Khaimah Municipality. We have Ms. Amna Al-Shehi, who is the Procurement Director at the Finance Department of the Government of Ras Al Khaimah. and Mr. Nitin Johar, who's Director Treasury at Ras Al Khaimah Investment and Development Office. Can I ask each of the panelists, starting with Andrea, to give a brief introduction about yourselves, and perhaps just also include a little bit about the role of your particular organization or authority, specifically in relation to energy efficiency and renewables. So if we can move on to Andrea, please.
Thank you, Ari. Regarding REAM, for those who are not familiar with our organizations, for REAM, REAM is an office within Ras Al Khaimah municipality, which has the mandate to coordinate implementation of the Ras Al Khaimah Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Strategy 2040, with the support of a dedicated committee. And also, REAM has the task to drive some specific programs which do not find a natural allocation in the government, which are in particular the retrofit program, the energy management program, and the solar programs of Ras Al Khaimah. This is done in collaboration with multiple entities of the government, which form a committee, which is a dedicated committee for the implementation of the strategy. I am the executive director, been nominated in 2017, and the strategy was launched soon after in 2018.
Thank you, Andrea. And Amna, please. If you can unmute, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor today and pleasure to be here. Actually, I would like to thank RAK municipality for making this webinar possible under the current circumstance of COVID-19 and highlighting the retrofit project at international level. Actually, finance department was responsible for managing and managing governmental projects, especially like retrofit project, because they are all the government departments are under her responsibility. Here you can go on.
Thank you, Amna. And if we could move last but by no means least to Nitin, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nitin. For those who don't know what Investment and Development Office is, IDEO is the sovereign wealth fund of the government of Ras Al Khaimah. We are also the holding company for all the government-owned enterprises across whole of government of Ras Al Khaimah, whether it is 100% owned or partially owned. So we are the holding company, and therefore we also manage each of these companies of the government of Ras Al Khaimah. I personally, in IDEO, I'm the head of treasury, and I am also on the board of various companies where we are trying to do various initiatives. And also as Andrea mentioned, I am part of the committee which has been formed by the government of Ras Al Khaimah to oversee all the energy efficiency and renewables strategy for the government of Ras Al Khaimah for the moment. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitin. So I think, we have three senior people here today who really have been involved at all levels in terms of what's been going on in energy efficiency and renewables in the Emirates. So hopefully we're going to have a very interesting discussion, and hopefully it'll be interactive. Participants are able to ask questions, so please do lodge your questions, and we will get to those after we've answered a few initial questions. Before we get to any questions, though, I'm going to ask Andrea to give us a bit of an insight, because there's now a fabulous annual report from Ras Al Khaimah, which is on the progress of Ras Al Khaimah energy efficiency and renewable strategy. So Andrea, without further ado, could I ask you to give us an introduction to what's been happening and some of the main findings of the reports, please?
Thank you, Vairi. Adding a little bit on your introduction, also on the strategy with the ambitious targets of 30% energy savings, 20% water savings, and 20% renewable energy in the mix. The strategy was launched towards the end of 2017, beginning 2018, and the first 2 years, 2018, 2019, were dedicated to the activation of all the programs. So by the end of last year, all of the programs had their own structure and their own initial projects. Year 2020 and onward are instead years of development, where the programs are rolled out. They are meant to address a larger portion of participants across the different sectors of the economy. And 2020, as also mentioned in our report, has been a year of development. Despite, say, the current global situation, 2020 has been quite a good year in terms of energy efficiency projects in Ras Al Khaimah. There has been substantial progress in the field of sustainable construction. So at the beginning of this year and at the end of January, Barjil, the green building regulations of Ras Al Khaimah have become mandatory for all the buildings of Ras Al Khaimah, so which is an important fact. There has been progress in the development of guidelines also for communities, so which extend beyond the buildings but address the public realm. And so the sustainable community guidelines are now ready for a pilot phase after a long process of development and consultation with a multitude of stakeholders. There has been progress in energy management. I think Anna later on and also Nitin may elaborate more on this important project addressing the entire government. There has been completion of some initial solar projects, with the municipality in particular, completing the first pilot project of solar PV. For the retrofit program, also there has been progress in terms of execution. The RAK, the economic zone, the free zone of Ras Al Khaimah, has completed its retrofit projects of 9 buildings and district cooling plant. And there has been progress also in execution of other projects, such as a project addressing 15 buildings of schools that will be completed by September. A project, important project with the Department of Finance that has been contracted for 53 buildings, out of which 12 will be completed by the end of this year. Progress also in other initiatives, such as, for example, the installation of a network of electric vehicle charging stations. We have 13 now in Ras Al Khaimah, not many, but there is already, say, an initial base. There is progress in green procurement. So soon the government will engage in a green procurement initiative, and there is substantial progress in agreeing on the standards of green procurement. And also an important factor is the fact that the programs are extending to the residential sector, which is normally very difficult to address in these programs, you know, for articulation, for this distribution. And I'm not talking about only Barjil, which definitely addresses the residential sector, but also I'm not talking about campaigns that were run. One of them was run by FIWA, Lil Khair Murshid, to replace water fixtures in a number of villas, addressing at least 6,000 villas in Ras Al Khaimah. Another program was done with the support of Masdar for the model villa, so addressing examples of villas where important retrofit actions are implemented. And also then there was a significant effort on the awareness side with the launch of awareness campaigns for schools and for residents, like, for example, the campaign Energy in Your Hands that has just been completed. For the future, we expect the programs, as I said, to expand across different sectors. We want to now start more significantly on the solar PV, on which there has been some development recently, with FIWA allowing some capacity to be developed. Relatively small, but at least allowing some projects to take place. And so we are moving towards some activation of pilot projects in solar PV. And a very important priority for us is also the development on the supply side. So in the coming years, in addition to the initiatives that we have already launched to incentivize the establishment of dedicated companies in support of our programs, the incentives have been quite successful, I would say, until now. We want to do more on that side. And so there will be a series of initiatives to support presence in Ras Al Khaimah of adequate supply of providers of products and services in our field. Of course, both the current activities and the future plans need to take into account the changed scenario of that is imposed by the COVID pandemic. Some participants may find some financial constraints, may be more, may have less appetite for capital investments, for example. But at the same time, here in Ras Al Khaimah, we believe that the pandemic actually offers opportunities for energy efficiency. From a government perspective, investments in energy efficiency, given that energy efficiency projects are delivered by local supply chains, those investments have typically a higher multiplier effect than other types of investments. And this is also supported by the Sustainable Recovery Plan of the International Energy Agency. We foresee that investing in this field will generate a net positive income impact on the GDP of the economy. And also, there are then, of course, there are benefits for participants, because investments in energy efficiency will mean reduction of OPEX, reduction of cost, which is particularly important in this moment. And there are specific opportunities, such as the fact, such as the lower occupancy of buildings imposed by the new scenario, by the new patterns of work, which allow, say, opportunities that were not there before for programs such as switch-off programs. Therefore, for this reason, we are keeping our targets unchanged. We still target the same, we're still accountable for the same results that were there before the pandemic. We don't want to change our targets. What we will do, perhaps we will change the way we may achieve our targets. And this means, for example, more focus on energy management. This explains the effort done in collaboration with the Department of Finance, for example, for promotion of energy management actions in the government. More focus on behavioral aspects, such as, for example, the switch off that I mentioned, supported by a scenario of lower occupancy of buildings. We foresee also a change in business models, leveraging the capital and finance where possible with the support of IDO. We are thinking about application of less capital intensive projects for the government in some instances. So, for example, we foresee a more frequent application of shared savings models as opposed to a guaranteed savings model. We have examples in Ras Al Khaimah, fortunately, of both, and we have developed standards for both, so we are ready to deploy more of those types. A very important factor, I think, from our side, is the expectation also of new relationship models with suppliers, with the supply side. In a scenario of higher uncertainty, we look forward to collaborate with suppliers who are ready to, share more risk with us. So we don't know what will happen even in the near future. Nobody knows. And we need to be ready for flexibility in our contracts. Flexibility, which means that our contracts can be expanded, can be contracted, and we need to have a relationship model which allows for those changes. And also a relationship model which shares some forms of risk. There is a very good example of this type that has been developed in collaboration with the Department of Finance, with a large retrofit project for the entire government. And I think this is probably something that Anna later on may want to elaborate upon. I think as an introduction, I think more or less I explained what I more or less wanted to say. I may then add more things during also the conversation.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And it does certainly seem that Ras Al Khaimah has been doing an awful lot right across the sort of whole energy efficiency and renewable spectrum. You know, right from, you know, rooftop solar to the retrofitting to Burjeel now being mandatory, which is interesting, and I think a positive change as well. Although I think from the report, I understand that it was very successful even when it wasn't mandatory, which is again positive. The fact that you now have a number of EV charging stations, I think again is going in the right direction, and hopefully we'll see more of those going forward. Green procurement as well, and that also that you're working closely with FIWA in terms of solar PV pilot projects, and it might be interesting to find a bit more out about, you know, what the plans are for those, the scale of those going forward, and what the intention is going to be. I think obviously you've touched on COVID, and you know, for all of us, 2020 has really changed the dynamics around energy efficiency and renewables, and of course that's in a way that none of us could have predicted. And indeed, in the last 6 months, it's really brought unprecedented challenges, not just for energy efficiency and renewables, but for all sectors and for everyone globally. So for many, the medium to long-term outlooks have changed quite significantly. And I think it's very positive that you've said that your targets are not going to change and that those are still going to remain in place. But perhaps the focus is shifting a little bit more towards energy management to behavioural aspects, but also about having flexibility and risk sharing in there. So I think that's, you know, maybe we can hear a bit more about that. And as you said, Amna might tell us a little bit more about that in terms of the retrofitting. I think, you know, for me, what I've seen as well, not just, you know, in the UAE, but globally, there's a real sort of emphasis in terms of green recovery. So, you know, a lot of sectors and industries related to energy and energy efficiency, I think, you know, we've seen stagnation, we have seen hiatus, but we've also seen a lot of governments globally saying, look, we want to frame the post-COVID recovery in terms of a Green New Deal. And that in itself is a policies, we're seeing policies for stimulus for low carbon business as well. So they're actually using it, you know, the whole pandemic in a sense as a benchmark to help promote energy efficiency, renewables, a low carbon economy. So it's perhaps also, as you said, it's an opportunity as well. Yes, you know, there's a lot going on, and obviously I think priorities do have to shift a bit. You've mentioned some, I think, in terms of what you're seeing from where you're sitting, and particularly from REAM. I think it'd be interesting just to understand maybe a little bit more, particularly from Amna and from Nitin. You know, is the pandemic an opportunity as well? Is it an opportunity to promote that green recovery? Is it, you know, that's something that sort of RAK is considering, Ras Al Khaimah is considering? And, you know, has there been any change in policy? I know that you said the targets haven't changed, but is there any sort of change in policy almost to, you know, increase the promotion of energy efficiency and to promote renewables? Are there likely to be any policy changes as a result of the pandemic going forward? And the other point I think that we do sort of related point to touch on in terms of what we've seen in the last 6 months is obviously the fragility of the oil price. And so a related point, I think, not just COVID, but also, you know, do you see that as having an impact going forward? So perhaps, Amna, we could start, and as I said, it'd be interesting as well to hear a little bit about the risk sharing mechanism that you've used in terms of the retrofitting.
As all we agree that the previous couple of months were so challenging for all sectors. It reshapes nearly everything. Nothing lost as planned before. As a government entities, we work hard and diligence just to manage and mitigate the impact of pandemic with the cooperation of all stakeholders. We were committed to a high level of transparency in dealing with the crisis impact. COVID-19 was a real test for us. It shows the level of solidarity and maturity in managing financial crisis and maintaining the same time sustainability and social welfare and well-being. From financial perspective, COVID-19 actually push us to prioritize the government spending and to support all the activity that will support the continuity flow of government services. We lie down all the expected impact and we draw scenarios and we activate contingencies blind, just as to avoid the drafting from current and future objective. As Andrea said, we don't want to change our objectives and plans. We're just changing the way we are doing it. We realized and we evaluate all the approved budget. We reallocate the budget based on priorities and the importance of spending in a way that we guarantee the continuity of economic booming in the Emirates. Besides that, we're participating in launching comprehensive package of economic incentives just to encourage the business going on in the Emirates. Plus, we studied the importance and the impact of all approved budget and projects, which led us to modify some regulation and procedure to overcome this crisis with a limited level of loss to be ready for the future expectation, because the expectation is not the same as before. We need to be ready for more and to be more flexible for future. Retrofit project was impact actually as the other projects. We reevaluate the project in a very holistic way, and we agreed, as Andrea said, that we are going to reduce the scope of the project for this year just to cover 3 main departments, consist of 12 out of 53 buildings. We can say that but still with the pandemic and its impact, we are realistic to our objectives and goals, especially with to have a high commitment to a REAM standard, especially in the building, plus continuing other projects like green procurements beside the retrofit project. So it is a time to manage and continue doing the same things, but in more flexible way. This is from finance perspective.
Thank you, Amna. And Nitin, could you perhaps give some of your perspective and maybe also touch, as I said, in addition to COVID, a little bit in terms of the volatility of the oil price and any impact that you think that may have as well?
Yeah, sure. So I will divide my response in three buckets, if I may. One is the impact of the oil prices. The other is the impact of COVID on business and therefore the consequent impact on the various initiatives. And the third would be the future of the going forward. So, so this first bucket being the impact of oil prices. What has oil prices done is in a lot of industries where oil or gas or coal in some cases has been a primary energy source. With these prices going down, the incentive for these companies to do certain amount of energy efficiency from an economic standpoint has gone down. Now the question again remains as how quickly will the oil prices recover, and which is a factor of how quickly we would potentially have a credible vaccine for this particular disease. So it's an interlinked question, and therefore right now the way I look at it, some of these very energy intensive companies are putting these plans of energy efficiency on the back burner simply because it is their payback period today has increased by virtue of a lower energy cost for the conventional fuels. So that is the first bucket. From a government of Ras Al Khaimah perspective, where we are looking at all the state-owned enterprises, all the companies that are owned by IDO. So all the energy efficiency projects that we had already started are continuing as per schedule. We have not called in the force majeure clause in any of the contracts. We are continuing with them on schedule, and rather in some cases ahead of schedule. For the new projects, we are continuing to do the evaluation, and we would, wherever the project is very, very attractive, those projects would get higher preference as compared to projects where the payback period is comparatively longer. And the third aspect, or rather within this aspect is, but we'll have to be, because of this COVID impact, a lot of the revenues of a lot of companies has reduced, which has brought a lot of companies to a far lower level of profit as compared to previous years. Therefore, all of the companies have shifted into a cash conservation mode. And with that cash conservation mode, what would potentially happen, and I'm not saying this will happen, what could potentially happen is if this COVID situation lingers on for far longer and therefore continues to affect their business, it is possible that some of these companies may decide to conserve cash for the moment rather than investing in a project which is capital intensive and has a payback over a say 3-4 year 5-year period. And at the same time, because it is very industry specific, at the same time there will be certain companies which will be very interested in doing the project immediately, because right now their facilities are not getting used. As an example, a hotel. Now, if the hotel is shut down, it's the best time to be able to enter that hotel, do all the project with respect to, do all the changes or all the work that needs to be done, because a lot of those works can't be done when the hotel is occupied by guests. So it is a very industry specific thing in a lot of cases, but yes, cash conservation is a common theme. However, there would be selective projects which can clearly go ahead at this moment. That's it.
Thank you very much. I think what you've all demonstrated is that whilst you might have had to reevaluate timing on certain things, the objectives are still there, the projects are still going on, and the commitment most significantly is there, which obviously is very positive. We're all cognizant of the challenges and the uncertainty around COVID, because obviously whilst we talked about the last 6 months, there is no certainty as to how long the pandemic will go on, and therefore the impact will go on. One would hope that the impact will reduce, because obviously perhaps we're all getting used to the so-called new normal. But also I think potentially there is that opportunity there to use that to move towards that, as I said, that green recovery, and also then to promote the clear targets that Ras Al Khaimah has set. I suppose moving away a bit from COVID, because it would be easy just to talk about that for the whole session, and I think we should try and just broaden the discussion a little bit. We've seen that the commitment of Ras Al Khaimah is across the board. We've seen a commitment in terms of, as I said before, green building, in terms of street lighting, retrofitting, and also, as you said, you've got pilot projects on the solar PV side. So it really is a very broad commitment. What we've seen elsewhere in the region is a concerted effort to attract private developers and private funding, private lenders, particularly in terms of large-scale, utility-scale renewables projects, but also in some respects, and perhaps less successfully, efforts to attract private investment in energy efficiency and distributed solar, rooftop solar, and so on. And so I'd just like to understand a little bit more, because I think the focus, a lot of the focus, certainly from what I understand in Ras Al Khaimah, is based on government projects. So retrofitting of government buildings, street lighting, rooftop solar on government buildings or car parks, and so on. So that the focus seems to be quite public sector orientated to date in terms of what's actually happened. So it'd be good to understand going forward where the priorities are in terms of involving and encouraging the private sector. So how do you intend to encourage and facilitate projects to be implemented by the private sector, and in relation to privately owned infrastructure, not just government owned infrastructure? And do you have any incentives or plan to have any incentives, whether it's financial or regulatory, for example, for rooftop solar, to encourage, for example, solar deployment on private warehouses, and even at the level of residential homes, which I know is a challenge from a regulatory perspective. So those types of things, what are the plans around those? And then maybe once we've talked about that, we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the larger, perhaps more utility scale PPP side of things. But if we could maybe start looking at, you know, the general encouragement of the private sector. Nitin, I think you're still on, so perhaps you could,
Yes.
could start.
Sure. So when we first conceptualized the solar project, this was in 2016. And what we did was at that point of time, we collected the data for not just the government companies, but also the private companies across Ras Al Khaimah. And we did a full study of how many private companies would have large enough roof areas to be able to host the rooftop solar, the distributed solar over those companies. And we did a full study of the load study and the single line diagram, and all of those studies we did. And then we reached a conclusion there are a lot of private companies within the government, within Ras Al Khaimah industrial areas, who would be who would be capable of having a solar rooftop generation in their premises. Then we went and met with each of these companies, and we found that a lot of these companies are actually very interested in participating in the rooftop solar. So that was the whole list and exercise done at that point of time. The issue that we faced, since you're talking of the public-private partnership, we also spoke to a lot of the energy companies, the solar companies, who were very happy to be able to come and install these rooftop solar panels on these private companies, and of course there were some government companies as well, on a lease model basis rather than on a capex basis. So there was a lot of interest from the private sector on the side of the companies who were wanting to have solar panels on the rooftop, and the private companies who were wanting to install the solar panels and therefore incur the capex and do the opex of the same. So what we did was we were the facilitators of this particular meeting, if I may say so, where we designed the concept. We were also working on the regulation, and then we were also doing, may I say, the entire framework agreement was also being put in place. So we were doing the entire background work. We did the entire background work to be able to facilitate this, which otherwise would have been very difficult. For example, if a company has a capacity of merely 0.5 megawatt of solar rooftop, then the buying power of that company is fairly limited, and would also not have the technical and legal bandwidth to be able to write the right amount or to have the right contracts in place, which is suitable for that particular company. So we were doing that exercise, and that is our model of a public-private partnership, wherein not only is the private sector putting in, whereas the private sector is putting in the capital, not just on government buildings, but on other private companies as well, where we are acting as facilitators without charging any fee of any sorts. So that was the model which we worked on, and it is I think it's fairly well established. The only last bit, and as Andre mentioned in the introduction, is that with the FIVA approval coming in place for the test phase, once the FIVA approval becomes more easily available, this particular concept can really take off.
And thank you for that. Do you have any expectation of the timing for the FIVA approval?
So we have one approval already in place for a few pilot projects. Now we would be, once these pilot projects have been executed, at that point of time, we will be able to go back to FIVA and be able to explain to them that these projects actually help their grid. I think today one of their reservations is that it could potentially destabilize the grid, whereas the solar does the exact opposite, especially if done properly. So therefore, let us see.
And other plans for larger scale solar PV, you know?
So there was again in 2016 there was a land identified in Ras Al Khaimah, which is for the purpose of the industrial scale, or what you call it, the IPP model, the independent power producer model. the IPP model solar, which is a fairly large site on a single axis rotation, can support a plant of about 200 megawatts. And there was a full technical study done that land has been earmarked with the help of municipality, earmarked for a solar project. So therefore, we are also ready on that aspect. And again, the question there is, when we produce that solar, that needs to be exported to a grid. And then that is where the discussion is today.
Thank you. And would Amna or Andrea be able to talk a little bit more about the incentives for private sector involvement in energy efficiency and retrofitting? Because I think that's also a very important element. And as you said, sort of the energy management and behavioral aspects going forward, you know, particularly in light of COVID, are extremely important. So to get that buy-in from the private sector, are there any incentives available, or how do you want to promote that and get the involvement?
Well, participation of the private sector in our program is fundamental. So this is a core priority for us, and there are two barriers that we need to address. One barrier that is the barrier of awareness of available opportunities and available supply to cover those opportunities. And this is something that we are already doing. In our activity with all the awareness and capacity building initiatives that we have launched. Some of them are already mentioned in our report. There is a second aspect instead, which is about the financial aspect. Some of it has been mentioned also by Nitin, Amna, which has to do with changing contractual models, lease model for solar, share savings model for a retrofit, which will allow participation in different ways from different players, so allowing capital to be injected by players who have the chance to do so. But this is not enough, definitely. The private sector comprises a number of entities. It comprises the large commercial enterprises, industrial, comprises the small and medium enterprises, comprises also the residential, the residential sector. And for this, we need to think about elevating the financial instruments and the financial mechanisms that are available here. This is something that is a priority for I think for UAE more in general. And we have in the roadmap of our strategy the addressing these elements. We have started with the Department of Finance, in particular for the government spend, but then for the private spend, we need to activate working on green finance. This is a topic around the world that has taken shape in the past years very strongly. Barclays green mortgage initiative, BNP Paribas, E.ON in France, the energy efficient mortgage action plan in Europe, which now comprises over 40 banks involved. These are programs which facilitate access to energy efficiency investments from a much larger pool of potential participants than any government-led program can do. And this is what we need to work on. The establishment, for example, of a fund, of a pool of funds, of a vehicle, which can channel, which collection and distribution of incentives to participate in retrofit activities at different levels of the economy, residential, small and medium enterprise, in my opinion, could be a game changer. So this is something that we are discussing. We are thinking about the potential strategy for this. We are involving also the relevant stakeholders. Normally, these programs are done with the support of a utility, because the utility is the one which collects the funds for the energy bill. And normally, this collection is turned into a public service fund, which is then distributed to applicants for certain forms of incentives, such as, for example, a contribution to a retrofit, a soft loan in the form of either of a grant or a soft loan that will make, say, the retrofit project much more accessible, especially for those players like the residents, the small building owners, small and medium enterprises, which normally cannot participate in some forms of contracting, such as energy performance contracting, which is typically available only for large.
Thank you. No, I think that's positive again, that we're seeing that, you know, there's an intention to work together with the private sector to get that green finance in place, and that you're already having discussions with stakeholders. So hopefully, you know, we'll see some fruits of that labour soon, because I do agree that that is going to be fundamental to rolling out, you know, your retrofitting programme to the private sector, and to make sure that it's, you know, rolled out across the Emirates and not just in government infrastructure. Perhaps just, you know, sort of looking at the enablers for your 2040 vision and making that a reality. One of the tools that I understand that you are using in RAK government is group buying. And that obviously requires a high level of collaboration and cooperation amongst the government stakeholders. So perhaps, Amna, you could tell us a little bit about the impact that this has had on project costs and implementation, and what lesson it could look to teach others who may want to copy that model and to do the same.
In government of Ras Al Khaimah, actually, we are adapting semi-centralization methodology in procurement. So government entities has the power to procure from their side up to a specific limit, while the governmental project usually are approved through finance department, where we consolidate the purchase and we benefit from group buying. This practice, actually, it's not new in government of Ras Al Khaimah. It is one of our deployed policy, which allow us to benefit from the power of purchasing and negotiation, also in order to get the best price at acceptable level of quality. It saves a lot of money, time and effort, plus workload by doing the process one-time shot on behalf of the other departments, where they can utilize their resources on other tasks. Referring to retrofit project, we break it down we break down the scope into phases, and that's allow us to manage it will allow us to manage the project more effective, and ultimately will give us a better chance to succeed. Running the whole idea of project in small areas, it will allow us to avoid any mistake might happen or misleading in future in the following phases. Besides that, it will make easier for tracking and evaluating the progress. So we recommend from our side, any entities want to deploy the retrofit project, they need to consider their purchase first of all to get the maximum benefit. Besides, they have to run as much as they could of awareness sessions to avoid resistance and to change the culture of usage. And to earn more collaborative support from the subsidiaries. These are the most challenging area in this type of project. You need, it's easy to implement a project, but it's difficult to push people to use this. So it's more important to create awareness session for them.
Thank you. And I think that's interesting, that sort of awareness and that collaboration aspect. And perhaps, you know, we've got three, you know, governmental entities represented today. We've got the municipality, the Department of Finance, and the Investment and Development Office. And I think, you know, you are working all together. It'd be interesting just to understand how you're collaborating with other governmental entities within Ras Al Khaimah, and whether you're working together or collaborating with other Emirates in the UAE, you know, in terms of furthering goals. And obviously at a federal level, I know that clearly you must be working together with FIWA on a number of matters. You know, how does that collaboration work? And, you know, how will that collaboration help promote energy efficiency and the achievement of these goals in terms of energy efficiency and renewables going forward?
On this, I can be, I think, very clear. You can see behind me, there is a representation of our strategy. You can see there are all the programs represented. And the people that you see there in that picture are real people, are director generals or executive directors or of the main government entities of Ras Al Khaimah, each of whom is responsible for a specific program. So there is a collaboration mechanism which is institutionalized in the form of a committee, as we mentioned before, and institutionalized in the form of a strategy document, or a policy document that has been signed by all the participant government entities, both those who are leading the programs and those who support the programs, because there are some programs and some activities that go across programs, such as, for example, the efforts that Department of Finance, IDO are doing. Those are related to, those are across the programs. Those are addressing the financial aspects of the programs. Other efforts done, for example, by the Environment Protection and Development Authority are also cross-program to embed some environmental aspects to all of our programs. With relation to the federal government, of course, our strategy is connected to the strategies related to energy conservation in general of the UAE or the federal government, the energy strategy of the Ministry of Energy, the climate change mitigation plans of the Ministry of Climate Change. And all this, of course, then consolidates also as a contribution of Ras Al Khaimah to the international commitments, such as the nationally determined contributions as part of the Paris Agreement. So all this sort of harmonizes into participation into federal and international strategies. On the international side, as I mentioned, we are very much interested in establishing connections. This year has been a very interesting year with that perspective, with the establishment of collaborations with multiple agencies, in particular energy agencies in Europe. These agencies are supporting us connect with the supply side, which is for us, as I said, very, very important. We want to accelerate in the presence of the supply side here, because this will work as a multiplier of our efforts. Our teams can never be huge. We need to rely on the private sector to develop this business, develop this sector, and only their presence here can help us do so.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear about the collaboration that you have with organizations outside of the UAE, and particularly, as you said, with organizations in Europe. Maybe just go back to one point, in terms of collaboration with other emirates, is there a collaboration plan there or ongoing there? And just interested from the perspective that there are obviously different targets in different emirates, so slightly different emphasis, falling then within the sort of federal target. So it'd just be interesting to find out if there's particular collaboration at that level as well.
As an example, all these programs have underlying regulation. The Green Building Regulation Program now has Barjil. It will be then complemented, it is already complemented by guidelines for efficient communities. The retrofit program has a set of pieces of regulation, ranging from standard contracts to incentivization mechanisms for ESCOs and energy auditors who want to establish an office here. There are standards for accreditation, so there is an accreditation process also. The electric vehicle, the efficient vehicle program is supported by directives to incentivize the adoption by the government. So all these programs have underlying regulation. Now, the way we are developing this regulation is very much in collaboration with other emirates. For example, we are involving, for example, Dubai Municipality, Abu Dhabi Municipality, federal agencies like ESMA, the Emirates Authority for Standardization and Metrology, in our consultation panels. So our consultation panels comprise many entities, either at a federal level and at a local emirate level of other emirates. And the collaboration until now has been very, very useful because some of our programs were sometimes implemented in other emirates, such as, for example, green building regulations. At the same time, we could offer some innovation in those to other emirates, such as, for example, there are several pieces of innovation that Ras Al Khaimah has brought into the game. One of them, for example, is the solar readiness requirement for new buildings, which we embedded in Barjil, which will allow in the future, as soon as, say, solar rooftop projects become more mainstream in Ras Al Khaimah, which allow participation from everybody, having had already prepared their roof for a future installation.
Thank you. Amna, you mentioned collaboration, but you also mentioned about knowledge transfer and education. And so one of the things I think, particularly when you're looking at energy efficiency, it's not just enough to have buildings retrofitted. It's about changing the mindset. It's about putting energy management at the forefront of what's going on. And obviously not just in relation to energy, but also in terms of water consumption and so on. And that ties in with Ras Al Khaimah's targets. So what are you doing to educate organizations and individuals? I understand you have a schools program, but, so I'd love to hear about that, but also just generally, sort of the educational aspect from a business perspective as well.
Actually, from our side, main concern, actually, it was the government of Ras Al Khaimah. The further aspects, it's coming from the municipality. We make several committees in different departments to be concerned about the retrofit, green procurement, the constructions aspect, which related to green building. This is our concentration, actually, from finance perspective. Besides that, we actually collaborate with the other federal department regarding the regulations to be setting the same comprehensive package of rules, and so we can ally them together. We don't want to sing out of the term. So we want all the aspects based on the government of Ras Al Khaimah to be suitable and allied with the federal ones. So the other aspects, may Andrea talk about it regarding the awareness for the community.
Thank you, Amna. Andrea, you would like to talk a little bit more about the community initiatives and education at that level?
Yes, so we have launched this year a campaign for schools. There were, if I remember well, over 60 schools participating in the program, about 60 schools participating in the program. It took the form of a competition by requesting students to propose ideas that would save energy in their family or in their community in different forms, by proposing, for example, a website or an app or any other mechanism. And we received very good participation. So all the schools in practice proposed projects, and some of them are very interesting. We are still studying them, and we'll definitely take inspiration for some initiatives in the future. At the level of a community, there are two types of engagement we are undergoing. One type of engagement is awareness in terms of, say, campaigns. So one of them I mentioned is Altaka Biedek, Energy in Your Hands, which requested participation in the form of an example of saving energy or water. And so participants posted on social media their participation, their proposed way of saving energy and water. There were several hundreds of participants, of submissions. And it was also, it was very exciting to see these people taking the lead in proposing ideas. The other way that we are dealing with communities is consultation. In our programs, whenever we propose something, something that has an impact on the community, we run consultation processes. And one of them is with community leaders, residents from communities, who normally participate by giving us feedback to propose, for example, programs or regulation. And this is an established process, and we are doing, for example, in the moment, the same thing for the upcoming pieces of regulation, such as, for example, regulation for community guidelines.
Great, thank you. So I'm conscious of time. We have a number of questions from the audience as well. So Maya is going to go through some of those questions, and I think quite a few of them are quite interesting, looking at sort of some of the bigger projects that are envisaged, as well as some policy implications from COVID and so on. So I'll hand over to Maya for that.
Thank you so much, Barry. Thank you all so much for that very engaging and interactive discussion. It's actually interesting because on a lot of the points that we've had questions on, you managed to sort of touch on it with the back and forth. So that's always good to hear. It's good to know that we're sort of aligned with what the attendees and market is expecting in terms of answers. One of the questions we've gotten a lot of, and I know we're a bit over time, so sorry to everyone for that, but I do want to ask at least a few of these questions just to make sure we cover these topics. So something we've had a lot of questions on in the Q&A is on solar projects. So sort of, I know Nitin touched on this a bit, so did Andrea, but to expand on it a little bit more, when it comes to on-grid solar projects, what are the sort of underlying regulations in Ras Al Khaimah? What are your plans? I know the pilot project is still ongoing, but if you could expand on, what's next for that? And also how involved is FIVA with this? Because we've gotten at least 5 or 6 questions on that aspect as well. Whoever would like to go.
Maybe I can add something. Nitin already mentioned the study that has been done and the pilot projects. Mm-hmm. There has been some recent development from FIWA with this regard. So with some opening to accept, to evaluate projects up to a certain capacity. Today, it is possible to submit for evaluation of FIWA projects that have up to 10%, that represent up to 10% of the connected load of buildings. This, of course, allows immediately some projects, and that's what we are working on. So in the future, we will develop some projects for the government, and there are also some other participants who can take part in it, so industrial participants. The limitation is, however, still very, very significant. 10% is not a big number. This means that some projects, maybe where there are roof limitations, will allow to capture the full potential, and it will make sense to launch them. Some other projects where the potential is much larger probably will have to wait until better conditions will be allowed by FIWA. Because by doing those projects now will mean probably reducing the potential for further intervention in the future.
Perfect. So to expand on that, Nitin, for private companies, there's a lot of industrial companies in Ras Al Khaimah who would like to, launch their own energy efficient plans, but more importantly, to launch their own renewable energy plans, maybe some solar integration or other renewables. Obviously, a few of the questions I've received are sort of on the cautious side. So I would love to get your input on, what the government's doing, what your thoughts are on how why they should be essentially doing this, as opposed to not. So to allay their cautions, if you will.
There are multiple aspects. One is, as the government of Ras Al Khaimah, we want to invite more and more industries to set up their industrial base in Ras Al Khaimah. Now, for a lot of the industries, energy cost is a very major part of their cost. So therefore, we would like to encourage more and more industries to be using solar energy, because that is a more cost-effective mechanism as well for their energy needs. And of course, it is sustainable at the same time. So that is where, was our initial aspect also in 2016 when we started. Our idea was to make the industries in Ras Al Khaimah more cost competitive as well. Because if you look at even the electricity tariff across the various emirates, it differs. It is different in Abu Dhabi, it is different in Dubai, different in Sharjah, and different in Northern Emirates. So therefore, if we have to attract industry, we'll also have to be very cognizant of the fact that the energy costs in Ras Al Khaimah should also be competitive. And the renewable energy forms an integral part of that competitiveness, if I may say, and helps in that competitiveness. And therefore, for any private industry who wants to set up a solar rooftop project in their premises, I would strongly encourage them to get in touch with Andrea, with the municipality team, who would then help facilitate getting the approval from FIWA. Because ultimately you can't do an off-grid structure. You'll have to still have FIWA's blessings in this particular arrangement. And municipalities are a single point of contact for all such applications.
Perfect. Andrea, would you like to expand on that a bit as well, or I feel like you did touch on it quite a bit, but
I think Nitin explained quite comprehensively. I think
perfect.
Topic.
Great. So I want to bring Vari in on this as well. From a, let's say, legal perspective, as our resident legal expert, for the companies that are, maybe a bit more afraid of getting involved with the regulations, they've not done these kind of projects before, again, on the industrial side, what would your thoughts be to sort of, encourage them to get in on this, whether it's on their own or it's as an ESCO model or energy cost savings model? What would your thoughts be on that?
So obviously RAK has put in place, regulations at an MRET level. In terms of anything that's connected to the grid, then that will, involve FIWA, because FIWA is responsible for, establishing policies and so on in relation to the Northern Emirates, including Ras Al Khaimah, and, and it includes, distribution of electricity within RAK. So FIWA is an integral part of that. But I think the important point that Andrea made was that, the government of Ras Al Khaimah as well is very, very supportive of the private sector entering the market. And they are also willing to assist entities in that, what's required in terms of collaborating and applying and approvals and so on with FIWA. So I think that's a very strong commitment from Ras Al Khaimah government to do that. And to me, that's a very positive sign, because, again, it's a collaboration between, Ras Al Khaimah governmental entities and a federal government entity, and they are clearly working together, but they're also willing to make sure that the private sector stakeholders have assistance in that as well. So to me, that is a strong commitment and a positive sign. So yes, there's a regulatory framework sitting there, but it takes more than that to get projects off the ground. And as you said, you need that confidence that there is that collaboration. And so I think Andrea made a clear commitment there to actually facilitate that as well.
Perfect. So expanding to another topic for a bit, something we got a lot of questions on was street lighting, specifically solar and energy efficient street lighting. I know that there was quite a bit of strategies on, improving and optimizing the street lighting in Ras Al Khaimah. What I would like to know is, are there specific plans for solar? If you could expand on that. We did get quite a few different questions, both from the manufacturer perspective and the industrial perspective. Whoever would like to touch on that, Andrea, Amna, Nitin, what the plans are for streetlights.
I can add maybe on this topic. First of all, we encourage solar everywhere it makes sense, it makes economic sense. So not in particular for street lighting or for specific buildings. In general, we welcome renewable energy whenever it makes economic sense. With the specific reference to lighting, the question is a bit tricky because first of all, we want to increase the lighting coverage in the streets of Ras Al Khaimah. This is a major ambition that we have. From the current 20%, 25% coverage to about 60-65% coverage of lighting. We can only do this if we adopt efficient lighting, first of all, as opposed to conventional lighting. So all of our projects are meant to adopt, for example, the highest, some of the highest efficiency LEDs. Then regarding solar, the question is, regarding the question on solar, whenever lighting is off grid, so for example, in some locations such as mountains, geologies mountain, where lighting is off grid sometimes, there solar is an obligation, so it's a necessity. And there we are doing it. So there are projects, and anyone who goes to the mountain can see that there are already a number of installations of lighting poles which have solar embedded with a battery system. Whenever instead lighting is not connected, is connected to the grid, so is connected to the FIWA grid, then we need to consider the fact that lighting is subject to a fee, to an energy fee, which is relatively low. It is similar to the residential local fee, which is a sort of incentivized fee. And this makes currently solar projects with lighting a little bit unattractive from a payback standpoint. So this means that I see, at least until the tariffs are organized in this way, less of an incentive for the local government to invest in solar lighting when connected to the grid. Perhaps there might be a project if FIWA agrees to do it with us. So if we can seek, say, a collaboration with FIWA, with the utility, in doing a solar project with lighting, perhaps then we can capture the whole pie of benefits, and then the project would make absolute sense.
Perfect. I think you definitely elaborated on that perfectly. I hope that does answer most of the questions. Just one last question I want to touch on. We've got a few sort of different ones on this. So obviously there's a lot of plans for procuring and buying new technologies and facilities in Ras Al Khaimah. So I would like to ask this to Amna, but of course the rest of the panel feel free to jump in as well. If there was one area of technologies or one sort of sector of technologies, whether it's solar, whether it's energy efficient lighting, whatever it might be, that you are looking for more technology providers and more manufacturers to come to Ras Al Khaimah, what would that be? If there's sort of anything you can add on this topic.
Actually, we start from the finance department. We prefer to start with a fundamental area, whereas we set up rules and regulations and laws to support the grid procurement and retrofit projects. So from our side, we promote all entrepreneurs and inside the local Emirates plus the whole Emirates to participate in these projects, so we can maximize the benefit and the cost, maximize the benefit we are getting from this technology. We start from procurement aspects. Actually, we started to have technology deployed inside the procurement by using a very big networks through the SAP system, so we can track more vendors from different areas from around the world, not only in the Emirates itself.
Oh,
perfect.
Maya, may I add here going forward, and I can say this very confidently, because I also look at the group procurement for all the government companies. So we have two hats. From our going forward perspective, more and more preference for procurement on various areas would be given to the manufacturers and suppliers who are based out of Ras Al Khaimah. So we will be encouraging going forward more and more people to set up their base in Ras Al Khaimah, be it industrial, be it trading, and supply to the government of Ras Al Khaimah and Ras Al Khaimah entities from Ras Al Khaimah rather than from any other geography. So going forward, and this is, I know this is not specifically answering your question of what are the specific technologies we are looking forward to buy, but this is going to be one important area of our attention, where we will be looking forward to more and more local procurement.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's it for all our questions. Andrea, if you have any final words as well, otherwise we can wrap up.
Well, I would say more or less repeat what I said at the beginning. We are very committed to our programs. There are a lot of opportunities upcoming. You will see some of the developments already this year. There is a pipeline of projects, retrofit projects. There are about 170 buildings in our pipeline. There are 2 tenders that we are working on. So there is movement, and there is also opportunity related to the issuance of our regulations. You will hear more in the coming months, and we look forward for participation of more and more entities, both on the demand side and the supply side in our programs. Thank you for organizing the workshop, for organizing the webinar. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Vairi.
Thank you so much. Perfect. That's a perfect place to end things then. So thank you all for joining us. A massive thank you to Andrea Di Gregorio from the REAM office in Ras Al Khaimah municipality for joining us. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you so much, Nitin Johar from the IDO for joining us today as well and for your great insights. Thank you so much, Amna, for joining us today for all the relevant things that you shared with us from the Department of Finance's perspective. And of course, last but certainly not least, Vari, for your phenomenal moderation and the sensational questions that you asked to the panel. Thank you so much for being with us today. That's it from us from IFP Group Webinars. Thank you all so much for joining us. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you could please take just a moment to answer the post-webinar survey that will pop up just shortly as well, that would be much appreciated. Other than that, we were happy to have you with us and hope to see you in future editions. Thank you. Goodbye.